Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Sundata TV. We're basically aiming to communicate on, business elements of IT issues facing Australian business today. And the subject for today is around managed services or using external providers to help look after your IT environment. As per our normal format, we have two other contributors today. So I'd like to introduce Jonathan Buckley. Jonathan is General Manager of IT Infrastructure at Auto and General Insurance. And I'll ask Jonathan to expand on ANG in a moment. And we've got David Cole, who's Sundata's sales specialist, particularly around IBM Power Technology, also specialising in storage solutions as well. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Jonathan, we've been dealing with Auto and General for about 20 years now, but I'd like to ask you just to maybe introduce ANG for our viewers today.
Yeah, so Auto and General is in the general insurance market, predominantly home and motor. They've just launched another product recently, which is Pet, which got launched today, which is great news for consumers in Australia. So it's 20 years young in Australia. The gross written premium. I think we've just hit over $1 billion. So it's an up and coming business within the Australian market.
Thanks, Jonathan. As we've done in previous episodes, the idea of our content is to talk about business issues facing clients running IT infrastructure. And the subject for today is around the use of managed services and external providers to help your own IT team with successful operation of your IT environment. So I guess a question that I'd like to start with, and I'll put this to Jonathan, is if we're talking about the context of managed services, Jonathan, what are the sorts of things that you would consider that would drive an organisation to using a managed service for part of its IT infrastructure management?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Con. So there are many factors, I think, for each organisation that'll take them down one road or another, and I think selective sourcing for me is probably more appropriate than managed services. I would say looking at it's about capabilities and making sure that you've got the right capabilities to enable to support business growth. And I think the challenge in today is that there's certain technologies now that are quite niche and require certain subject matter experts, and the resources are hard to come by and hard to retain. So I think they could be some of the factors really that are going to drive companies to look at more of a managed services for certain components. If you look at service level agreements, sustainable pricing models, and having a trusted partner that can come in and assist with this. I think they'd be the key drivers for me, I think.
Thanks, Jonathan. David, I might just ask you the same question from your perspective of talking to a lot of different clients of different scales and complexities. What do you see with respect to the drivers for people to go to a selective sourcing or a managed service type approach?
Yeah, certainly we see a lot of niche environments that require specific skills or specialist skills, tasks that don't happen regularly. So software upgrades for operating systems or application utilities is something that we do a lot of our work with clients on a regular basis. It might be 6 monthly updates. The other thing, as Jonathan said, there is some very niche, specific skill sets that are required in IT operations for certain platforms, and certainly in Jonathan's case, the IBM platform is one of those. And where we see a lot of clients that might have an internal resource that's subject matter expert, what happens when they go on leave? What happens when they're sick, etc. So just having that redundancy, quite often it's complementing the internal team rather than putting a service together to replace the internal team.
Thanks, David. I know I've had a conversation with a client recently where their rationale for an external provider was that there was a contract so that the provider could be held to account, probably in a more diligent way than sometimes is the case with internal staff. Jonathan, is that something that you've experienced, that's a benefit?
Look, I definitely think that managing certain service levels across certain systems definitely comes into play. And there are challenges in any organisation with some of these operational activities. And I think another part of that also is probably looking at, the value that your internal staff are using managing some of these systems as well. So some of the regular, more, I hate to use the term mundane, but some of these mundane tasks, that actually frees up your internal staff to work on more value types of work that's going to benefit the business in the future as well. So there's definitely a balance there, I feel.
Yeah, I think the way I've heard it described is the tension between urgent versus important. So compliance stuff is important, but sometimes it's not urgent until there's an audit, for example. David, is that something? Yeah, David, is that something that you've seen where there is that tension between urgent and important?
Yeah, and sometimes it's with an internal team, the SLAs possibly aren't even known or agreed to. So there's a big difference between a core application ERP type financial system being down or needing urgent attention, as opposed to something that's seen within the organisation and the users, i.e. mail, being down. One's an inconvenience, but you could generally guarantee that the IT help desk are going to get more calls for the mail server being down than the core ERP system being down. One has a business impact and the other one has a user impact. But having those SLAs, as Jonathan mentioned, sometimes can be an advantage that you remove the personal nature of user requirements to business requirements. Yeah,
and I guess it also, a contract in simple terms is an artifact that can satisfy compliance requirements. Still needs to be executed and managed to that contract and to those SLAs. But David, just going on with something that Jonathan mentioned about IBM Power specifically, as a product that skills are not exactly on every street corner. Can you give us a context from your point of view about how skills for power plays into this conversation and the advantages of having access to, if you like, a contracted level of support?
Yeah, well, certainly from an IBM Power platform, the core operating systems of the IBM I series and the Unix AIX, the skills aren't readily available. It's I guess an older technology. It's not seen as sexy. Universities aren't educating people on those platforms anymore. It's all around Windows and Linux and networking. So clients may have some capabilities. We do have clients that run these IBM Power platforms where the accountant might be the system operator, and the platforms themselves lead to minimal touch compared to the the service that they deliver. So we do see clients that have a large dependency on these systems, but a very low level of expertise across the support team. So, and that's where someone coming in like Sundata as a managed service or an outsourcer to provide that extra layer of skills to, as I said, provide the redundancy, but also just provide those detailed skills to avoid the disasters. We often get called when there's a disaster, but the ideal would be that we can avoid the disasters by managing the systems proactively.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Jonathan, if I could come back to you and just continue this line of thought about important work that sometimes suffers, in favour of the urgent. What are the sorts of things that you've seen, your experience, that can derail, just good hygiene, good systems management, good practices getting done and always being deferred?
Yeah, look, I think this comes down to the nature of each business. So a lot of businesses are focused on execution and agile, and it's about getting products out to market. And I think that's where sometimes there can be a conflict where, you know, we need to get a product out to market, and resources get realigned to enable that. So a lot of business units don't often think about the day-to-day management and running of these systems. They're focused on the next code drop and the next iteration of that platform, and I think that's probably where you see some challenges.
Yeah, no, fair enough. What can I ask you for where you've actually gone down the path of a selective sourcing, or you picked out an outside provider for a specialised piece of knowledge? Have you been through a situation where you've articulated the benefits of that sort of back up to the business, either as part of the business case to get it done, or post, where you've actually been able to demonstrate benefits of that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the cost, there's the cost side of things. Obviously, the cost benefit analysis that gets demonstrated, and you know, to enable that initial conversation. But then there's the business value, you know. And if you look at availability and sustainability as well, and you bring those factors in, then yes, I've been through on numerous occasions with certain platforms that have been externally managed and been able to articulate that.
Yeah. And the business accepts that once they've seen the proof, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about a journey, and I think that's the way, you know, you need to approach these things. You know, there's no one size fits all, and you know, each organisation needs to go through their own processes and make sure that they can articulate these benefits to the organisation. At the end of the day, it's around value. And you know, I would encourage people not to monitor the inputs, but also make sure that you're looking at the outputs and the value. I think is the key.
Well, what do you see as the biggest challenge with a business case around this sort of area?
Look, yeah, look, I definitely think that in business cases we don't often articulate the internal resources required to manage systems internally. I think that's probably one area where, you know, you can add some value and benefit around that and try and articulate that. You know, it's not just around one person does X, Y, and Z. You know, there's a seat, there's a laptop, there's a PC, there's all the other ancillary things that come around that. You know, how many hours does it take to obviously maintain certain systems as well, and you've got to factor in that long-term view as well. So really look at the total cost of ownership for a system.
Yeah, I think there is a perception sometimes that because internal staff are already being paid for, they can always fit in another job.
Absolutely. and that goes back to the previous question about some of the challenges, right? So
yeah, thank you, David. I know when we're at the coalface, you know, the first objection about outside providers or managed services is always about it's more expensive than if we do it. What's your insight into that sort of conundrum?
Yeah, well, the cost is always one of the starting conversations. You know, is an internal IT person seen as free? Are they you know, perpetual resource that you can just keep squeezing for more and more time? But it's also about I guess associating the cost to where the value is delivered, because a lot of these tasks that get done, clients that might have a single subject matter expert, their skill set, you know, is a massive pool of skills from A to Z of the technology, but 80% of the work that they're doing is probably in the 20%, you know, of the most basic tasks that you do, just the day in, day out admin type tasks. So the investing, you know, in that subject matter expert or experts, if you need several of them, to do a whole lot of mundane tasks for the majority of their time, as opposed to using their key skills, once a quarter, once a year, when needed. That's not particularly efficient. So that needs to be assessed in the whole business case around services, getting the right level of skill, doing the right tasks, and that's where someone that has, I guess, as a provider of skills, whether it's us or any others, has multiple layers of technology capabilities, is then being able to attribute that right level of skill set to the task to then get that cost model right.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. To come back to you, Jonathan, so one of the things that we've seen as a supplier is one of the other, I guess, obstacles within a business is that bringing in an outside provider is often seen by internal IT staff as a threat. Oh, they're getting ready to get rid of us all, to paraphrase. What's your perspective on that conversation with your own IT team about, that transition of bringing in providers from outside?
Yeah, look, it's a natural thing for people to have some of those thoughts. It was the same on the cloud conversation over the past couple of decades. We're all going to go to cloud. We'll all be out of work, and I think, and again, it's around looking at the value that these type of agreements bring, and you've got to communicate with your staff, and you should be building a career for your teams and helping them on that journey. There's always new skills, there's always new technologies. Just because that you may be augmenting some of that to one of your partners or a provider doesn't mean that there'll be never any need for internal IT teams. Generally speaking, you could say internal teams, they have a vested interest in that organization. They understand the business a lot more, and they can be providing added value in other areas. And I think partnership is probably where the conversation should be. You're working with a trusted partner, so they're just an extension of the internal team. And if you look at it in that context, then it's adding more capability to your department.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I think where we've seen it as a successful relationship, it is definitely seen as a partnership, not as an us versus them, or something that's riddled with tension about what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. David, have you got anything to add on that particular point?
Yeah. One of the key areas that I see a lot, and again, working in the IBM Power Platform, there is a lot of, I guess, we've used the term nicheness about some of the operating systems and the skill sets required. And Con, your original question, it was sort of around how the internal teams can sometimes approach, what they see as risk of their futures and whatnot. Sometimes because of the niche capabilities, we've got a lot of organisations that have, as I said earlier, a core application that just happens to run on one of these niche platforms. So if it's managed by the internal staff that may have some skills, but they may not be, super experienced in that platform, those guys accept all of the risk, but they don't have the skill sets to be able to, I guess, mitigate or accept that risk. So the pressure's on their shoulders, but they may not have, the 10, 20 years of experience that an outsourcer may have in those platforms. So that sometimes we see that there's a whole lot of relief where we can take that pressure off the internal team. They can get back to what they do day in, day out, and our team can take on that risk and have the experience to be able to accept and mitigate and manage that risk.
Yeah, I think I'm recalling some situations where I guess on the one side, it's like the business wanted to be self-contained and self-sufficient in terms of technical knowledge. but they sort of hit a brick wall and they had to do I think in this case, a Citrix upgrade, and they hadn't done one for about 2.5 years. And so the time to deliver the upgrade was going to be quite significant compared to getting an outside supplier in who just does nothing else except Citrix upgrades. And that applies with anything that requires deep subject matter, whether it's power technology for the server platform or something like Citrix. We're seeing a lot of that in the current 2020 environment with Microsoft Teams. A lot of people are moving to that platform and they're getting past just the informal usage and they're wanting to make it a robust implementation. And so we're seeing a repeatable solution in that space. I think we've covered a fair amount of territory in a short time today. Just before wrapping up, Jonathan, is there anything that any thoughts that come to mind while we've been chatting that you'd like to just offer as part of a conclusion?
Yeah, I was just thinking, just back to the questions that we've been going through, and another one is around, capabilities of your internal team. If you've got a 24/7 operation, and this is where it can assist as well, in particular for after hours support and maintenance. This is where, again, you can augment your internal staff with a provider and a partner.
Yeah.
And so, but I'd just encourage if companies are going on this journey, do your due diligence, go through, do your business case, make sure you understand exactly what you're getting, and hopefully you'll get a successful outcome.
Yeah, well, and I guess the other thing is that these relationships, it's not like getting married or something. You can do a proof of concept about a capability or a short-term contract or a month-to-month deal, and if you've got confidence and the business drivers demand it, then you can look to move it into a 12-month or a 2-year or 3-year contract. That's certainly what we've seen, and we've seen a lot of our clients be able to give their business reassurance if there's a contract framework. It's not always necessary. It's more about the outcome. Come back to your point, Jonathan. People get focused on inputs, as in prices and hourly rates and all that stuff. But for the business, it's really the outputs that determine whether it's a successful partnership. David, did you want to just take a moment to summarise what we do as a managed service provider in the power space, just to finish off?
Yeah, so from our I guess IBM platform practice, we can offer managed services. We don't approach it as a one-size-fits-all, because not all organisations are anything like their competitors or their neighbours or people down the street. So we do try and tailor our services to, I guess, the requirements, and it may be a stage thing. But we do provide services for, I guess, IBM I and AOX as the two primary IBM operating systems on the Power Systems platform. We also provide managed services around the Windows and networking products as well. But specifically from the Power perspective, operations, as Jonathan said, after hours support. Some clients just prefer to use us, to augment their team as after hours. And the other part to it is sort of scheduled activity, where we might have an agreement in place that provides capability for ad hoc services, but we have a scheduled, repeatable update solution for the client around services to keep operating systems patched, applications patched, utilities patched, which is one of those tasks that, if it's an internal job, can just get kicked down the road and never occurs. And these days, with a lot of compliance and security risk around vulnerabilities, organisations just can't afford to ignore keeping their systems updated. So we are finding that a lot of people are preferring to put that to a contract, which means that the upgrades get done on schedule, as opposed to just being slotted in when it suits around other more or seen as more mission critical business projects.
Yeah, I think an analogy I've used, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's a bit like getting your kids to brush their teeth. It's basic hygiene that we're talking about. Patching's not the thing that people generally put their hands up for, or documentation, or doing the after hours, or being on call over public holidays or long weekends. So it's a mundane benefit, but that is a benefit to internal teams as well. And there generally are more interesting and more challenging projects in the queue than checking the logs every morning or, you know, making sure the patching's been done. So there's benefits at a number of levels for people, as Jonathan said, just to consider the benefit in the specific context of their business requirements. So, look, I think that might be a good time to wrap up. I'd like to thank Jonathan Buckley, our guest for this week's episode, and David Cole as well for his contribution. Thank you both, gentlemen. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Sundata TV, and we look forward to seeing you on one of our next episodes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Con.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.